The sky was painted with soft colors of orange and red as the sun dipped low beyond the hills. The man walked slowly carrying a rolled-up tent on his shoulder. A small bag of supplies in one hand and a calm look on his face. He had decided to spend the night by his ranch lake just as he used to when he was younger. The water shimmered in the fading light and the sound of crickets already began to rise from the grass. He found a small clearing near the edge of the lake, a spot where his father once taught him to fish, and with steady hands he laid down the tent poles, stretched the fabric and hammered it into the earth. The work was simple, and every movement carried a memory of his family and the land that belonged to them for generations. He collected dry sticks from the edge of the trees, crouched down, and built a neat pile for a fire. When the spark finally caught and flames rose, he sat back watching the crackling would glow brighter against the coming night. The smoke curled up into the air and the reflection of fire danced across the calm water. He leaned back against his bag, stretching his tired legs, breathing deep the smell of pine and fresh earth. For the first time in months he felt peace. No traffic noise, no phones ringing, just the sound of frogs by the shore and the steady chorus of crickets. He opened a simple can of food, heated it over the fire, and ate slowly, staring at the stars as they began to appear one by one. He thought of his father who used to sit with him on this very shore, telling him stories about how the land was theirs and how no one could ever take it away as long as they respected it and cared for it. Those words echoed in his mind now as he gazed across the water, calm and proud. This lake was not just water. It was memory, heritage, and family. The night passed quietly, the flames burned down to embers and he crawled into his tent, pulling a blanket over himself. The air was cool but the peace around him was like a shield. He drifted into sleep with the soft sound of the lake waves lapping gently at the shore. Morning came with the call of birds and golden light across the water. He unzipped his tent and stepped out stretching his arms. The fresh breeze filled his lungs and he smiled at the calm start of the day. But his smile quickly faded as his eyes caught something new near the shore. Hammered into the ground were fresh metal signs, bold black letters on white boards reading, "No trespassing, HOA property." His chest tightened as he walked closer, his boots crunching over the damp grass. He touched the cold metal of the sign, confused and angry. This was his ranch lake, his family's land. No one had ever questioned it before. He looked around and saw not one but 3 more signs placed at different corners of the shore, all shining new in the morning light as if someone had come at night to put them there. He crouched down and pressed his hand into the soil, remembering how his father once stood here saying, "This ground will always tell you who it belongs to, don't let anyone else write their name on it." But now someone had dared to do just that, to claim what was not theirs. He scanned the tree line, wondering who had done it. Then his eyes narrowed as a thought formed in his mind. Only one group was bold enough to pull such a stunt, the HOA. He stood there silently, the signs gleaming like insults in front of him. Neighbors had whispered before about HOA overstepping boundaries, about Karen the president who treated every road and fence as if it was her kingdom, and now it was clear she had set her eyes on his lake. His fists clenched but he did not shout, he did not rip the signs down. Instead he stared at the water, calm but sharp, like someone who was not surprised but quietly preparing. He knew this act was only the beginning, and the real storm was yet to come. The sun climbed higher, birds sang, but the man's eyes stayed locked on the signs, his silence heavier than any words. The lake that once gave him peace now whispered of a coming battle, and he knew that before long, voices would rise, police might come, and truth would be tested. But deep inside he also knew one thing. The land never lies, and no matter what signs they planted, this lake had always been his and would remain his. The man was still standing near the water when he heard the sound of tires rolling on the gravel road. The noise broke the calm of the morning and made the birds scatter into the trees. He turned slowly and saw a shiny black SUV pulling up near the lake. The door opened fast and out stepped Karen, the HOA president, wearing her dark sunglasses and holding her usual clipboard like it was a weapon. 2 board members followed behind her, their faces tight and nervous. Karen marched forward with her heels clicking against the dirt as if the whole land belonged to her. Her eyes scanned the tent, the campfire ashes, and then locked onto the man, her lips curled into a smirk. "What do you think you are doing here?" she demanded in a sharp voice. "This is HOA property, and camping is not allowed. You are trespassing." The man did not move, his hands resting calmly by his side, his eyes steady as he looked at her without saying a word. Karen clearly expected him to argue, but his silence only made her angrier. She raised her voice so the neighbors who had already begun to gather could hear. You cannot just come here and set up like this. We have rules, and you are breaking them. One of the board members nodded quickly, adding, yes, HOA rules prohibit unauthorized camping by the lake, though even he looked unsure as the words left his mouth. The man finally spoke in a calm, steady tone. This is my land. This lake belongs to my family. I am not trespassing. His words were simple but carried weight. Karen let out a short laugh and shook her head. Your land? Don't be ridiculous. This lake is part of our community. It is for members only, and you are not one of them. You abandoned this place long ago. Now it belongs to us, she said confidently, waving her clipboard in the air as if it was proof. Some neighbors whispered quietly from behind the trees. One said, I thought that lake was his father's. Another answered, it was, but Karen always claimed HOA had it now. The man stepped closer to the fire pit, poked the ashes with a stick, and said nothing more. His calmness was like a stone in the middle of a rushing river, unshaken by her words, but his silence made Karen boil with rage. She stomped her foot and shouted, if you don't leave immediately, I will call the police. You will be arrested for trespassing. The board members looked at each other nervously. One whispered under his breath, are we sure about this? But Karen cut him off with a glare. Don't question me. I run this HOA, and I know the law. She stepped even closer to the man, pointing her finger at his chest. Pack up your things now, or I will make sure you regret it. The man stared at her finger but didn't flinch. He simply folded his arms and looked out at the water, as if the lake itself was answering her threats. The crowd of neighbors grew larger, phones began to record, and every second of Karen's arrogance was being captured. Karen noticed the cameras, but instead of stopping she raised her voice even more. Everyone here needs to know. This man is nothing but a trespasser, and HOA will not allow him to stay, she declared, her voice echoing across the water. But the man's calm silence made her look smaller even as she shouted louder. Neighbors whispered again. Why doesn't he look afraid? Because maybe he knows something she doesn't, another replied. Karen clenched her fists, her face red with anger, and turned back to her SUV. Fine, she snapped. If you won't leave on your own, then I'll have the police remove you. Let's see how calm you are when they arrive. She climbed into the SUV, slammed the door, and sped away, leaving dust rising behind her. The man watched her go, then quietly sat down again by the water. As if nothing had happened, the neighbors stood frozen for a moment, then slowly drifted away whispering about what was to come, and everyone knew one thing. The real fight had just begun. The sun was climbing higher in the sky when Karen returned. This time she was not alone. Behind her SUV came two more cars filled with curious neighbors. Some stepped out carrying their phones ready to record. Others simply folded their arms as if waiting to see a show. Karen marched straight to the lake with her board members trailing like nervous shadows, her voice sharp and commanding. Everyone gather here. You all need to see this. You need to see how an intruder is trying to take what belongs to our community. She pointed toward the man who was still sitting calmly near the fire pit, his eyes fixed on the water as if none of the chaos behind him mattered. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's the old owner's son. One said, he grew up here, I remember. Another added softly, but Karen drowned them out with her voice. No, he abandoned this place years ago. He has no rights here. This is HOA property, our rules, our land. She waved her thick binder in the air as if it was some holy book of authority, opening it randomly to show highlighted lines no one could really read from a distance. Right here it says no unauthorized camping. Right here it says no private fires. Right here it says HOA regulates all activity on common property, and this lake is community property now. Some people nodded uncertainly, but many frowned, the doubt growing stronger. A woman whispered, but I heard his father never sold the land. And another man muttered, Karen's rules are not law. Karen heard the murmurs and her face turned red. She raised her voice louder. Do not listen to lies. I am the president here. I know what belongs to us, and I will not allow a trespasser to sit here like a king. She pointed at the man again, but he still did not move. He simply picked up a small stone and tossed it into the lake, the splash echoing through the tense silence. That one calm act made her look powerless in front of everyone. Furious, she turned back to the crowd and shouted, if we let him stay, he will claim more. He will take our roads, our homes, everything we built. Do you want that? Her words were heavy, but the crowd did not cheer for her. They just stared, confused and uneasy, some recording, some whispering. no one fully standing with her. The man finally spoke in a calm, low voice that carried across the water. "This lake has been in my family for generations. It was my father's and his father's before him. No binder can erase that truth." The crowd gasped at his words, simple but sharp. Neighbors exchanged nervous looks. One whispered, "That sounded more real than anything she said." Another agreed, "His silence feels stronger than her shouting." Karen slammed her binder shut and stepped closer to him, her face inches from his. "If you don't leave right now, I swear I'll call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs." Phones lifted higher, everyone recording, everyone waiting. The man stared at her with steady eyes and then turned his gaze back to the fire pit, saying nothing more. His silence was like a wall she couldn't climb, and that drove her mad. Karen spun back to the crowd, her voice trembling with both fury and desperation. "Fine, you want proof, you want action? Then watch, I'm calling the police right now." She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 on speaker so everyone could hear. She loudly told the dispatcher, "Yes, this man is trespassing on HOA property by the lake. Send officers immediately." Her smirk returning as she looked at the man, convinced her power would finally crush him. The neighbors murmured in suspense, some uneasy, some excited, everyone waiting to see what would happen when the police arrived. But the man just poked the fire with a stick, as if even the law on its way did not disturb his calm, and that calmness made Karen's confidence look more fragile than ever. The hot sun climbed higher while Karen stood proudly with her phone still in hand, repeating to anyone who would listen, "The police are on their way. Finally this trespasser will be removed." She paced back and forth near the lake, pointing often toward the man as if trying to prove her control even before the officers arrived. Her board members nodded nervously, but their eyes betrayed doubt. They had never seen her push things this far. The crowd of neighbors grew larger, some leaning against their fences, others standing with arms crossed, many holding phones up, recording every second of the confrontation. The man remained calm, seated near the ashes of his fire pit, his gaze steady on the water, his silence more powerful than any shouting. He had not moved to pack, he had not shown fear, and this made people whisper louder. If he was trespassing, he would be nervous, wouldn't he? One neighbor said, "He's too calm, maybe he knows something," another added. The sound of sirens finally cut through the murmurs, growing louder until 2 police cars rolled slowly down the gravel path, dust lifting into the air behind them. Neighbors stepped back to clear space. Karen straightened her shoulders, pulled off her sunglasses, and plastered a victorious smile across her face. She waved her arms as the officers stepped out. "Over here, officers. This is the man. This is the trespasser I called about. Remove him immediately." She shouted, her voice trembling with excitement as if the moment of triumph had finally come. The officers, a tall man and a shorter woman, walked calmly toward the crowd. One carried a notepad. The other rested her hand on her belt. Both of them scanning the scene carefully. They listened first as Karen rushed forward, waving her HOA binder in front of their faces, speaking quickly and loudly. "This man set up a tent by the lake. He built a fire. He is camping illegally. This is community property under HOA. He has no rights here. We demand he be arrested for trespassing." The officers let her finish. The taller one raised a hand calmly. Slow down. We'll get everyone's side. Please step back." Karen's face twitched with annoyance, but she obeyed, though she kept pointing at the man as if her finger alone could condemn him. The officers then turned to the man who stood slowly, brushing ash from his hands, his movements calm and deliberate. The taller officer asked, "Sir, do you understand why we were called here?" The man nodded once. "Yes, she believes I'm trespassing on this lake." His voice was steady, his words simple, but every ear in the crowd leaned forward, waiting. The female officer asked, "And do you have any proof of your right to be here?" Without hesitation, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded packet of papers, yellowed but neat, sealed with a county stamp. He handed them to the officer. "This land has been in my family for generations. This lake is part of my inheritance. Here are the deeds." The officers carefully inspected the papers. Silence fell over the crowd. The female officer ran her finger over the embossed county seal and looked at the signatures. The male officer flipped through the tax records included. Their expressions remained calm, but there was a subtle shift, a recognition in their eyes that the papers were real. Karen saw it too and panicked. She rushed forward, waving her binder again. No, ignore that. Those are just old papers. HOA rules override them. Look at our regulations. Look at this binder. It says right here. But the female officer shook her head, her voice firm. HOA rules are not law. They cannot override county property records. The crowd gasped, neighbors whispering, she's wrong. He was right all along. Karen's face flushed red. She slammed her binder against her side. You don't understand. We control this lake. We voted on it. This is common property now. The male officer straightened, his voice cold. You don't control land you don't own. And according to these documents, this man owns it, not the HOA, not you. Phones were held higher now, recording every word, and the whispers of the crowd grew into excited murmurs. Karen's triumph had turned to desperation, and in her eyes, for the first time, there was fear. The crowd was frozen in silence as the officers studied the papers. The man stood calm with his hands folded behind his back while Karen shifted restlessly on her heels. Her binder clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. She tried to smile but her lips twitched with nervousness. The female officer finally spoke, her tone clear and steady. These documents are official. They are signed and sealed by the county. This man has legal ownership of the ranch and this lake. Her words echoed across the water. Neighbors gasped loudly. Phones recorded every second. Whispers raced through the group. He owns it. Karen lied to us. She said the HOA had rights. The male officer added firmly. There is nothing here that suggests HOA has any authority over this lake. No transfer, no sale, no record of ownership. These are his family lands. Karen's face flushed crimson. She shook her head wildly and stepped forward waving her binder. No, you don't understand. I'm the president. This binder has all the rules. We voted years ago. This is our property now. He has no place here. Her voice cracked as she shouted, her confidence breaking in front of the crowd. The officer cut her short with a sharp tone. HOA rules do not override the law. Your binder does not replace county deeds. Your votes cannot seize private property. The crowd erupted in murmurs again. Some laughed in disbelief. Others stared in shock. One man shouted from the back. So all the fines she gave us for using the lake were illegal? Another added bitterly. We paid fees for years because of her lies. Karen spun on the crowd angrily, pointing her finger. You all agreed. You all signed the covenants. Don't turn on me now. But her words fell flat. The neighbors' faces were filled with anger and betrayal. No one was siding with her anymore. They had believed her stories for years. But now with police standing there and legal documents in hand, the truth was undeniable. The man finally spoke, his voice calm and strong. This lake was my father's and his father's before him. No board meeting or binder can change that. I never sold it. I never gave it away, and today the truth has returned. The officers nodded in agreement. The female officer turned back to Karen. You and your board members have been trespassing by enforcing rules on land that does not belong to you. If you continue, we will have no choice but to take legal action. Gasps rippled again. Phones captured every angle of Karen's humiliation. Her board members stood frozen like statues behind her, sweat glistening on their foreheads, clearly wishing they could vanish. Karen's jaw clenched, her pride breaking under the weight of reality. But still she whispered desperately, No, this can't be. I built this community. I made the rules. I am in charge here. Her words sounded more like a plea than a command. The male officer looked at her directly, his tone final, Not here, not today, not ever on land that isn't yours. The crowd broke into louder murmurs. Some neighbors even clapped quietly. Others recorded with satisfied smiles. And in that moment everyone realized the power balance had shifted. Karen's reign of fear and control was collapsing in front of the very people she once ruled. The man did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply picked up a stick and drew a line in the dirt at the edge of the lake. His calm gesture carried more authority than all of Karen's shouting. The land itself seemed to bow to him, and the people knew it. Truth had unfolded, and the HOA queen was nothing more than a trespasser. The lake was silent except for the soft splash of water against the shore. Everyone's eyes were locked on the officers as they exchanged a brief glance and then turned back. Toward Karen, the female officer spoke first, her voice sharp and clear. After reviewing these documents, it is clear this land is not HOA property. It belongs to him. You and your board have no authority here. The words hit like thunder. The crowd gasped and a wave of whispers rushed through them. Phones zoomed in closer. Neighbors muttered in disbelief. So all these years we were paying for nothing? She's been trespassing the whole time. Karen's face twisted. She shook her head violently and shouted, "No, that's not true. You don't understand. I am the president. My board voted. Our rules apply everywhere in this community, even here." Her voice cracked, desperation dripping from every word. But the male officer stepped forward, his voice stern. "Rules do not override law, and your HOA cannot claim land that was never sold. By continuing to act as if this lake belongs to you, you are trespassing, and right now you are harassing the lawful owner." His words sent a chill through the crowd. People turned to each other with wide eyes. Some even laughed bitterly at the irony. Karen had called the police to remove him, but the police had just declared that she was the one in the wrong. Karen's board members looked terrified. One whispered under his breath, "We shouldn't have pushed this far." Another slowly began to back away from Karen's side as if to distance himself from her downfall. The man stood steady, his calmness like stone, his silence cutting deeper than any insult. He simply folded his arms and looked at Karen with eyes that carried both patience and quiet victory. The female officer turned toward the crowd, addressing them directly. "Let it be clear. This man is not trespassing. This is his family's property. Anyone who tries to enforce HOA rules here will themselves be trespassing." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some clapped openly. Others shook their heads at the betrayal they had suffered for years. One neighbor shouted loudly, "So all the fines for fishing and swimming here were fake?" The officer nodded firmly. Yes, they were illegal. Gasps and angry voices rose. Phones captured every second. Karen's face grew redder. Her binder shook in her hands. She slammed it against the table set nearby, shouting, "No! This isn't over. I am still in charge, and I will not allow this." But her words had lost all power. Her threats sounded hollow, even pitiful, and the neighbors who once feared her now watched with contempt. The male officer warned her sharply, "Calm down. If you continue disrupting or threatening him, you could face charges yourself." Karen froze at those words, her jaw trembling, her eyes darting nervously at the crowd who now recorded her shame. She realized every scream, every desperate denial was being saved forever, evidence of her arrogance and her lies. Meanwhile, the man bent down, picked up one of the fresh HOA no trespassing signs hammered into the ground, and held it up for all to see, his voice finally breaking the silence. "This is the only trespass here, this sign, this lie, forced on land that was never theirs." Then he dropped it onto the dirt with a heavy thud. The sound echoed across the lake like a final verdict. The crowd erupted, some clapped, some cheered, and others shook their heads in disgust at Karen. But one thing was clear. The balance had shifted completely. HOA's reign of fear was broken, and now Karen herself stood branded as the trespasser. Karen stood frozen, her face red, her hands gripping the binder so tightly it looked like she might tear it apart. The crowd pressed closer, their whispers louder, their phones capturing every second of her humiliation. The male officer's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Let me make this clear. If you or your board attempt to fine this man again, if you harass him or put up one more false sign, we will treat it as harassment and trespassing, and charges will be filed." The words made the entire neighborhood gasp. Neighbors exchanged looks of shock, and for the first time in years they saw Karen's power break completely. She stammered, "You can't do that. I am the president. I make the rules. You can't just take that away from me." But the female officer shook her head, her tone sharp. "We didn't take anything from you. You never had it in the first place." The crowd reacted with murmurs and some even laughed quietly. The weight of Karen's lies was crushing her. One man shouted from the back, "So she fooled us all these years. She fined us for nothing." Another added bitterly, "She made us pay for fishing in his lake, and it was never hers." The anger in the crowd began to boil. People raised their voices, pointing at Karen, demanding answers. Her board members stepped back further. One whispered nervously, "We're done. She's finished." They looked ready to abandon her completely. Karen tried to scream above the noise, "Stop recording. Stop listening to him. Stop listening to them. I am still your president." But her voice cracked, drowned out by the clapping and shouts of her own neighbors who no longer feared her. The man finally stepped forward, his calm steps heavy with authority. He held up another deed page and showed it to the crowd, his voice steady and strong. "You paid her money for years, but it was built on a lie. Every dollar, every fine, every threat she gave you was worthless. This land was mine then, and it is mine now. The law stands with me." The words hit the crowd like a wave, cheers and claps broke out. Phones recorded his steady face. Neighbors nodded, relief spreading through them. For the first time they felt free from the grip of the HOA queen. Karen's eyes darted desperately. She screamed, "This isn't fair. I built this place, I made it beautiful, you all owe me." But the female officer turned toward her sharply, her hand brushing the cuffs on her belt. Calm down, or I'll have no choice but to remove you." The warning was enough to silence Karen. Her mouth snapped shut, her breathing heavy. The image of her being arrested in front of everyone hung in the air, and it made her body go rigid with fear. The man bent down, picked up another one of the new HOA signs, snapped it cleanly in half, and tossed it onto the ground, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, his voice quiet but powerful. "No binder, no false rule, no shout can erase the truth. This lake will never belong to liars, it belongs to the land, and the land belongs to me." The crowd erupted in cheers this time, loud and unstoppable. Some clapped, some shouted his name, and others laughed at Karen, who now stood shaking, her binder slipping from her hands and falling into the dirt, its pages scattering uselessly across the ground, recorded forever by dozens of phones. The final blow had landed. Karen had lost not just the fight but the respect and fear that kept her in power, and everyone watching knew her reign was over. The crowd around the lake did not disperse quickly. Instead, people stayed, talking loudly, laughing nervously, some cheering while others shook their heads at the years of lies they had lived under. Phones stayed up recording as Karen stood stiff like a broken statue, her binder lying open in the dirt, pages fluttering in the breeze. Her board members slowly slipped away into the background, leaving her completely alone, no one willing to stand at her side anymore. The police officers gave their final warning. The male officer said firmly, "This matter is settled. This man is the rightful owner. If HOA attempts to interfere again, there will be legal consequences." The female officer added, "You've wasted police time with a false report. You should be grateful we're letting you walk away without charges today. Don't test us again." Karen tried to respond, but no sound came out, her throat dry, her eyes wide, her power crumbled completely in front of everyone. Finally she turned and stomped toward her SUV, her heels sinking into the dirt. Neighbors parted to let her pass, but none offered respect. Instead their cameras followed her until she slammed the door and sped away, dust rising behind her retreat like smoke after a fire. The man watched it all calmly. He did not smile. He did not shout in victory. He simply walked back to the lakeshore and crouched near the water, touching it with his hand like greeting an old friend. The reflection of the sun shimmered across his calm face. He whispered softly, "Still ours." Though his voice was quiet, the neighbors nearest to him heard it and felt the weight of his words. They realized this man had never needed to prove himself with noise. The land itself had proven him right. Slowly neighbors approached him. One older man with gray hair spoke. "I knew your father. I knew this lake belonged to your family. I am sorry we didn't stand up sooner." The man only nodded quietly, no anger, no blame, just a calm acceptance. Others murmured in agreement. Shame mixed with relief as they realized they were free from the false chains Karen had wrapped around them. Children ran to the water's edge laughing, dipping their toes in the lake that for years had been declared off-limits. Families smiled watching them. A young couple whispered, "We paid hundreds in fines just to let our kids touch this water, and all along it was his." They shook their heads, but their smiles showed a sense of freedom. The lies had been washed away. As the crowd slowly began to leave, conversations grew louder about what would happen next. "The HOA is finished," one man said. "Without Karen's power it will collapse." Another added, "She'll probably run. She can't show her face here anymore." The murmurs carried a sense of finality. People no longer feared her name. Her threats had become jokes, and her empire had fallen in a single day. The man finally stood and returned to his camp. He stirred the ashes of the fire pit with his stick, added a few more logs, and watched the flames rise again. The glow reflected in his calm eyes. He poured himself coffee from his small kettle and sat down in his chair facing the lake, his silhouette strong against the evening light. Neighbors who were leaving glanced back one last time and saw him there, sitting quietly like the guardian of the land, and they knew everything had changed. By nightfall the park was empty, the police cars gone, the neighbors back in their homes buzzing with the story that would spread across every corner of the community. But at the lake there was only one figure left, the rightful owner sitting by the water in peace, his tent behind him, the stars above, and the lake shimmering as if it was celebrating its freedom from lies. Karen's voice no longer echoed across the shore. Her signs no longer stood in the ground. Only the truth remained. And the truth was stronger than any binder. Stronger than any false rule. The truth was that this lake had never belonged to the HOA. It belonged to him, and now everyone knew it.